Good evening. President Trump vexed tonight, according to the Washington Post, after repeatedly telling crowds of voters at rallies across the country how not racist he is and how much he's done for minorities across the country, including taking credit for lowering the unemployment rate for Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans. The president finds himself with a problem. People think he's racist. A majority of them, 51%, according to the latest Quinnipiac poll, and that's from 2 weeks ago. And this angers the president. According to the Washington Post, quote, President Trump considers himself a branding wizard, but he's vexed by a branding crisis of his own, how to shed the label of racist. Now, keeping him honest, before we go through a laundry list of reasons that a majority of Americans might feel this way, before we point out the second anniversary of the white nationalist, white supremacist violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, that killed a young woman and for which the president declared there were very fine people on both sides the night of a torch-lit march by neo-Nazis chanting "Jews will not replace us," let's remember how the president sees himself on the issue of race.
I am the least racist person there is anywhere in the world.
I'm the least racist person there is in the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Before, while, and since he's run for president, and this is the reason, according to a presidential advisor who spoke to the Washington Post, and I'm quoting, the president views the characterization largely through the lens of politics, said one close advisor who spoke on the condition of anonymity to share private conversations, explaining that Trump feels the charges of racism are just another attempt to discredit him, not unlike, he believes, the more than a dozen women who have accused him of sexual misconduct or the investigation into Russian election interference. In other words, according to this unnamed aide, the president is just as innocent of racism as of sexual misconduct. It's an incredulous thing to say, but at the same time, it's actually right on the money, because it's something people on the left and right would completely agree with for totally opposite reasons. But it also fits the worldview of this president when it comes to facts inconsistent with the image that he wants you to see.
And just remember, what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening.
Well, that was the president a year ago on criticisms of his handling of the economy, but it is a fair summation of his attitude toward any criticism, particularly when it comes to his actions and rhetoric involving people who aren't white. That's when he tells 4 congresswomen of color to, quote, go back to where they came from, even though they're Americans and 3 are from the United States. That, he says, isn't racist. That to call the black majority district in Baltimore of Congressman Elijah Cummings a, quote, disgusting rat and rodent infested mess, that too is not racist, according to the president. That when he fans flames of birtherism or attacks the judge fronting the case for Trump University over his Mexican heritage and says he can't be unbiased, or takes out newspaper ads in 1989 demanding the reinstatement of the death penalty for 5 black youths who, it turns out, were wrongly convicted of rape, and then to never apologize for doing so, none of that is racist, according to the president. Or what about when the president has spoken about an invasion from Mexico?
This is an invasion. When you see these caravans starting out with 20,000 people, that's an invasion. We're on track for 1 million illegal aliens trying to rush our borders. It is an invasion. You know that. As you look at what's marching up, that's an invasion.
A USA Today report showed that of the 64 rallies Trump has held since 2017, when discussing immigration, the president has said invasion at least 19 times. And the far right loves that word, too, when talking about immigration. In fact, the New York Times reports today that it's a favorite word of a lot of media types on the right. The El Paso mass shooter as well. The shooter talked of invasion, just as those on the far right did. The shooter's concerns about white people being replaced by immigrants also found along the far right. The Times found that the far right and the shooter had, quote, a shared vocabulary of intolerance that stokes fears centered on immigrants of color. Now, this is not to say that President Trump or anyone on the far right is responsible for the El Paso shooting. It's only to cite the danger of encouraging and echoing this kind of language, because when you make it okay to talk about invasions or infestation or say that we need to send people back to where they came from, people are bound to pick up that message.
And obviously and importantly, Omar has a history of launching vicious anti-Semitic screeds.
That was the president immediately cutting off that chant, as he said he did. As a result of all that went on for 13 seconds, as a result of all this, at least one former top aide of the president has had enough. Anthony Scaramucci served 11 days as White House communications director. He and the president are now, facing off over Twitter. Scaramucci told my CNN colleague John Berman today, quote, "I think you have to consider a change at the top of the ticket when someone is acting like this," in reference to President Trump. This afternoon, the president tweeted, quote, "Scaramucci, who like so many others had nothing to do with my election victory, is only upset that I didn't want him back in the administration where he desperately wanted to be. Also, I seldom had time to return his many calls to me. He just wanted to be on TV." Mr. Scaramucci tweeted back, quote, "You are losing your fastball, very weak troll. Bullying is the most anti-American thing in our culture, and it is emanating from the Oval Office. Many have called and are willing to work on a necessary replacement. Time to call in a good relief pitcher. POTUS is lost." And Anthony Scaramucci joins me now. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm wondering, just on the issue of racism, I know in the past you have said you believe the president's not a white nationalist or white supremacist, but I think you made the point that he is making a play consciously using some words. Is that right? That he's essentially playing to that audience for political reasons?
He's trying to be too cute by half. He's luring that out there. He wants to trigger everybody with that. But look, at the end of the day, he treats people like objects. So there's no way he's a racist, because when he's looking at you, he doesn't see color. He just sees a potential transaction, an opportunity, or a detriment. And so that's not racism. I mean, that might be narcissism. I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't know.
But that's fascinating.
But it's not racism, because I've watched him.
Sorry,
I've watched him do it. It's like a worse level than racism. You know what I mean? It's like racist against everybody. He could care less. You're just an object either in his way, for or against. And then he's got a playbook. He's using it on me right now. So the playbook is, let me intimidate, let me bully, let me say stuff. I mean, you got to think about this guy. He's using the American presidency and the Twitter feed from the American presidency to go after his fellow citizens from the White House, from the presidency, right? And so you got to just think about how disturbing that is. And so for me, he's talking about other people being un-American and they have to go back to places where they came from and stuff like that. Hey, Mr. President, you're being un-American. Bullying is un-American. And meantime, the First Lady, who's a very nice person, she's got this anti-bullying campaign going on, and he's lighting up and personalizing this. Anderson, I've got 5 children. This guy's trying to put me in harm's way on his Twitter feed, as he's done to other people. I'm not saying I'm being singled out. I could care less. But the reason he's doing it is not because of me. He's doing it to scare the bejesus out of all those people up on the Hill that hate his guts. They're up there looking at each other, shaking their head. We got to wait this guy out. It's either 15 months or 5 years. They hate his guts. He knows it. They know it, but they're afraid to speak up.
Yeah, I mean, they're not.
What he does is he uses the Twitter feed.
They're not exactly profiles and courage.
As a speed bump to stop everybody.
Yeah, I mean,
remember, John Kennedy wrote 3 books, and he said his smallest book was Profiles in Courage, right? Because it's hard to have it. It's not easy to be in the line of fire of the president of the United States. And he knows that. But look, it's disgusting at this point. You brought up 3 or 4 things. What triggered me the most was the whole send them back nonsense. I mean, what are you doing? I mean, that is literally a racist trope for 2 centuries. Okay. Everybody's parents that have some kind of ethnic background or grandparents have heard that. I said when I was still supporting him, hey, I'm still supporting you. You're doing a lot of good things. Why do you want to go full on racism like that and divide the country? The first thing of the country is united. You're the president of the United States and you're leading the free world. What are you doing?
Right. I mean, the thing about send her back, the thing about send them back, I mean, that, as you said, that is something that was used against Irish immigrants when they came, against Polish, German, everybody, Japanese. I mean, it's it is the oldest racist trope there is. And for the president of the United States to be saying that and encouraging the chant is stunning. And people think it's become normal, but it is not normal.
But it's not normal. And just speaking personally, my grandmother was told that. Produced 3 children. 1 was my mom, 2 of which served in World War II. 1 was on the Normandy beaches, and 1 fought in the Ardennes at the Battle of the Bulge. Did you want her to go back? I mean, these are American heroes, okay? And And she worked very hard as a maid and in the hostess laundry to help me get the lifestyle that I have now. Anderson, it's ridiculous. And here's the thing. My fellow Republicans have to wake up out of their slumber. A true demagogue doesn't want one syllable, one sentence out of line. And that's not loyalty. That's like blind obligation to the demagogue.
Right, but that's not,
the Ice King or wherever the guy was.
Let me just sorry to interrupt, but we're on a satellite, so it's a little hard to have a give and take. No, but there's a lot of people who are listening tonight who say
I was going to promote one of your HBO properties again. But go ahead.
There's a lot of people who are watching tonight who will say, you know what, I agree with what you're saying, but they would say to you, where have you been? You're just coming to this realization now. He's been bullying people for a long time.
Very, very
and
fair.
He's had the cabinet.
Absolutely fair.
He had the cabinet sit around and praise, literally have them go around praising loyalty. All the Trump surrogates who are on, if they say one thing, negative or nuanced about him, he gets upset with them.
Okay, so that's a very fair criticism of me, so I have to own that. I'm not going to deflect that or make up excuses, but what I would say to your viewers is that I grew up in a neighborhood and I grew up in a blue-collar family, and the president's promise on the campaign was related to helping to provide advocacy for those people. And I should have been more attuned to the stuff that he was doing and less attuned to my policy alignment with him, and I have to own that, okay? So I think that that's very fair. So people want to criticize me for speaking out now, that's legitimate, but there's others that feel that way and they don't have the courage to speak out. And so what I'm asking them to do is think about it. When you go to bed tonight and you're thinking about your country, don't focus on your wallet or your pocketbook. Focus on what's right for America and say, is this guy normal? Is this the right way to handle things in America? And I think when you do that, you'll get to the place where I'm at. And by the way, it'll take a while for a lot of these people that like the president. I understand that. But this is not the right guy for America. I believe in the Republican Party and Republican values. And we gotta fix the party. So we need a new leader at the top of the ticket that can bring people together, that can speak with the right rhetoric to people, and also explain to people that we're going to do this together. All of our problems in the country, we're going to fix and solve together. But I mean, I know the policies are better on the Republican side for the most part. I mean, I'm obviously socially progressive, but I'm just saying we can do this, Anderson. I was going to bring up the Ice King. You remember the scene in the Game of Thrones where Arya Stark kills him?
Sure.
And then all the other dead zombies like evaporate? That's where we are right now. We gotta have an Arya Stark come into the room. Let's knock this guy off, okay? And I mean politically, obviously. Let's move him to the side. He had a good 6 innings. He's throwing stuff at the backstop right now. He can't even hit the strike zone. And he's doing things that are classically un-American, like bullying his fellow citizens from the Oval Office on his phone.
So let me ask you.
Come on, enough is enough. Let's move on from this now.
Do you think this is, I think you've used the word deterioration, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you talk about he's not, I don't know the sports analogy because I'm terrible at sports, but he's not, he's not doing as well. His fastball is slowed down. I mean, do you believe that is just...
he lost his family.
Lost his fastball. Do you believe that is a degeneration, something in him, or is just politically he's misreading stuff?
It's a combination of things, okay? It's drunk on power. As we know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Everybody's scared of him, so there's nobody inside the White House that's giving him the right advice. You know I had my issues with General Kelly. Well, let me tell you something. This thing went way downhill after General Kelly left. Now, I have subsequently made peace with General Kelly, invited him to my conference, and we did a 45-minute interview. We had dinner together and lunch. And he's an American patriot, and so we buried our differences, okay? But I'm just saying, after General Kelly left, this thing is on a descending slope because at the end of the day, he won't take anybody's advice. And if you're a good journalist, Anderson, or a great journalist, go ask people in Washington, who does the president listen to? And the truth, the honest people will say, nobody. He listens to nobody. So do we want to go and do that for another 4 or 5 years?
I mean, isn't this Republican Party now his? I mean, it's not the party of Reagan anymore.
No. This is like, it's like I told John Berman. It's like the Green Witch. Once you throw the water on the Green Witch and she starts melting, those gray soldiers, they came, hey, Dorothy, I'm sorry about this. We were behind the Green Witch because of her perception of power. Okay, if they come to him in a unit, they know I'm right. Okay, trust me, they know I'm right. They're just afraid to say it because they don't want to get primary. They don't want to get Trump Twitter lit up with like the big cyber bully that he is. They don't want any of that stuff, but they have to dig deep now and think about the country. Think about America.
Right, but every Republican who's done that has left.
Think about your grandparents.
I mean, every Republican who's done that, who's spoken out, has decided they got to leave.
Okay. So let's bring those people back and let's have another conversation with the people that are still in the party and say, okay, come on, guys, this isn't right. I mean, we can come up with the right policies that can help the most Americans, lift most people out of poverty. We can fix these asymmetric trade deals, and we can reignite the great alliances that we have around the world. But we're not going to do it with this guy.
Let me just.
We're not going to do it with this guy.
I just got to ask.
By the way, Anderson, he's getting worse. He is getting worse.
Let me just ask you. I got a bunch of TVs in my office.
It's your show, brother.
I got a bunch of TVs in my office. I saw some folks on Fox talking about you. I clicked on the sound to hear it, and they were saying something like, basically, you're putting your finger in the air, you're sensing which way the wind is blowing, and you want to be able to go to cocktail parties in New York and that's why you're speaking out.
Yes,
so I just want you to be able to respond.
It's super important to me. I'm a blue-collar kid that lives 2 miles from my parents. I don't even go to cocktail parties in New York. I wouldn't even know how to find them. I live 2 miles from my parents and my mother-in-law, and I take care of them every day. And so that's just that nonsense. They want Trump to see them on television, and they say, oh, that's good. And then he'll say something nice about him maybe or something like that, and they'll puff up their chests with all this falseness. So that's a bunch of trust me. You think I want to be doing this? I mean, I got a great family and a great business, and I reconnected with my wife after the fiasco 2 years ago. Do you think I need to be doing this? But I'm worried about the country, okay? And if you're worried about the country and you're thinking about your ancestors that helped to build the country and get it to where it is now, you don't want it like this with this kind of nonsense and this division. No. The president is giving people a license to hate, Anderson, and a license to be angry about things when he should be uniting people. And so, they can say whatever they want about me. I get that. But trust me, you think I want to be doing this? It's not about getting attention. It's about, hey, guys, we got to wake up now because we're in a dangerous situation. The yellow light is on. It's going to go red. If he wins the next presidential election, look out. He hasn't listened to anybody in the first 4 years. What do you think is going to happen in the next 4 years? So to me, I know they're with me. I just would like a few more phone calls. I got a tremendous number of phone calls today from people in Washington, outside of Washington. There's tons of business cards in my hand here. Let's go. Let's break the fever that's going on in the Republican Party.
Anthony Scaramucci, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Hey, nice spears, and thank you.
All right. Have a good night. The president's also raising attention on conspiracy theories involving Jeffrey Epstein as well. Yeah, apparently he has time to do that, too. Details on that ahead. Also, Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang on the campaign trail. He joins me tonight. He became emotional when talking about gun control this weekend. We'll talk to him in a moment. This weekend, President Trump elevated 2 conspiracy theories involving the Clintons and Jeffrey Epstein, who killed himself in prison. It's not the first time the president's dipped his toe in the conspiracy pond, so to speak. The Washington Post highlighted 23 conspiracy theories the president has elevated both in and outside the White House. There they are. For instance, the Clintons were involved in Epstein death. They were also involved in Vince Foster's death. President Barack Obama in birtherism. Ted Cruz's dad involved in a JFK assassination. Joe Scarborough involved in a death. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia may have been murdered. Deep State trying to oust him. Vaccines can cause autism, and on and on. Joining me now, 2 veterans of the Clinton years, Joe Lockhart, the former press secretary, James Carville, strategist for the 1992 campaign. Joe, what does it say to you that the president of the United States, has time to, tweet about and peddle conspiracy theories involving Jeffrey Epstein's death?
Well, the right wing in this country has been at the conspiracy business game, for as long as I can remember. You remember Hillary Clinton calling it the vast right-wing conspiracy. But before it was done without fingerprints and undercover, with President Trump, He's making it normal for everyone to do this. This is the president of the United States. And, taking this in context, this would be a little bit like Barack Obama accusing George Bush of murdering someone. And, that would never happen. It's startling. With Trump, it's not so startling because, he's a little bit nuts when it comes to these conspiracy theories, but it's done for a reason. It's done to do, like the sound you played in the first block, talking about don't believe what you see, don't believe what people say, just believe me. It's Orwellian. And what it does is reduces overall trust in the government, where people then start believing the conspiracy theories. So he's taken something that's been in the playbook of the right wing for quite some time and exponentially increased, both its frequency and power.
James, I mean, obviously this is nothing new for the president, to push conspiracy theories regularly. I mean, it's new for a president to do it, but not for this president. His whole foray into politics obviously started with birtherism. But do you think to me, what's particularly interesting about this is that it basically, as Joe said, it makes people kind of doubt everything. It's sort of along the lines of, everything is rigged. There's something going on here. Something's not right. And yet he's the president. Arguably, it's his Department of Justice. He oversees this stuff. He is ultimately responsible. And yet he's sort of as almost like a strange bystander watching and tweeting about stuff.
What I don't buy is that he's getting worse. I mean, it started with the Central Park Five. Of course, it went to birtherism, and you had, Senator Cruz's daddy assassinating President Kennedy and every other stupid thing that he says. Look, the truth of the matter is we just have to accept the fact that we live in a country that 35% of the people in this country would rather be told racist lies than be told unifying truths. Now, the good news is 65%, I think, are not like that. But he's been doing this forever, since I can ever remember, before he even ran for office. I don't think he's one bit worse today than he was before. He's the same person. They keep a count of their lives. I think it's like at 10,000 now. I think CNN does it, or Toronto, or Glenn Kessler. It's all documented. It's nothing, nothing new here.
Joe, I mean, yesterday, Kellyanne Conway, of course, nothing new, defended the president promoting the Clinton-Epstein conspiracy theory, saying, quote, "I think the president just wants everything to be investigated." I don't even know, really. There's no question there. I'm just, what the?
Yeah. It's. I'm not sure I have an answer. It's speechless.
You have no answer to my non-question.
No, and it's on its face, it's ridiculous because if someone had followed up with a real follow-up and said, "Well, do you think the president's family should be investigated? Do you think the president should be investigated?" She would have said, "Of course not," because that's a political hit job. It's really sad seeing people who had a decent reputation get destroyed by the cancer of Donald Trump. But it's just outrageous that she'd stand out there and say that sort of thing. But there's no real answer to it.
I think one of our guests wrote the book, Everything Trump Touches Dies, and I'm blanking on who it was, but
Rick Wilson.
I'm sorry, Republican strategist. It does seem, James, that no one survives a close proximity to President Trump, survives in the sense of reputation and ultimately he turns on everybody, just as, now with Scaramucci.
Yeah, it's a great parlor game that people play. Who has been hurt the most as a result of being part of this administration? Who came out with it with the least amount of damage? I think it's generally acknowledged, and maybe General Mattis got out there with the least amount of damage. But I mean, think of all the people who've been ruined, wrecked, disgraced, embarrassed, you name it. And, but my point is, they knew this going in. He's not one bit worse today than he was the day he was elected. I mean, you can't be a birther. There's no explanation for birtherism that you're willing to exploit racism. I'd be careful of calling someone a racist, but clearly he doesn't mind exploiting it. And there's no other explanation for being a birther. You just knew that coming out of the chute. So I don't buy this that he's getting any worse. He's always been horrific. I don't think he can go any lower than the place he started.
James Carville.
I really don't. And we say investigate. Why don't we investigate whether the world is round or flat? I mean, let's have it. Every side needs to be heard in this debate for sure. That makes as much sense as Joe was pointing out.
But to James's point, I think it's getting worse in one sense, not necessarily on the racism. If you look at in the first year, there were people like Gary Cohn around who could stop him from doing things. He is walking us into a trade war that could precipitate an international financial crisis, international recession, maybe even a depression. There's nobody around now that's telling him not to do it. No. That has gotten worse.
Well, Gary Cohn would take stuff off his desk.
Racism aside,
he would take it off his desk.
The consequences. The consequences are getting worse, I think.
James Carville, thank you. Joe Lockhart as well. Always good to have you on.
Okay, you bet.
We have news tonight on an arrest made following the massacre in Dayton, Ohio, who police have taken into custody and why. Also going to talk to the presidential candidate who broke down into tears over the gun deaths in America over the weekend. Andrew Yang on that moment. Coming up next. There's been an arrest following last Sunday's massacre of 9 in Dayton, Ohio. A friend of the deceased gunman was taken into custody on federal weapons charges. 24-year-old allegedly bought the body armor and the 100-round double-drum magazine used in the attack. Investigators say he stored them in his residence to help hide them from the shooter's parents. Over the weekend, a slew of Democratic presidential candidates addressed the gun violence epidemic at a forum in Iowa. One of them, Andrew Yang, was brought to tears by what he heard from a mom in the crowd.
My beautiful 4-year-old daughter, Dayla, was struck by a stray bullet March 2011. My son, my daughter's twin brother, witnessed what happened that day.
I have a 6- and 3-year-old boy. I was imagining. I was imagining it was one of them that got shot and the other saw it. I'm so sorry.
I spoke to Andrew Yang just before air. We just played that emotional moment from this weekend in Iowa. Are you surprised, given all the attention right now on the issue of background checks and guns, that Mitch McConnell is not, willing to bring folks back to actually address this, or even clear on what moves he would support, if any?
At this point, the will of the American people is very clear, and hopefully he'll see reason and reconvene the Senate so we can get this legislation passed. When you say, am I surprised? Unfortunately, it's not as surprising as I wish it were.
It seems like you can make the argument he's trying to slow walk this and basically hope that attention dies down on it and passions die down on it.
Yeah, that's been the playbook, certainly. They hope that the country turns its attention to something else, but I have a feeling that the country is not going to let this one go until we get some laws across the finish line.
The president talks about wanting meaningful background checks. In the past, after Parkland, he talked about raising the age for buying a long rifle. He talked about background checks as well, and then nothing happens, and he seems to kind of walk away from it as soon as people who support those ideas leave the room, and the NRA or somebody else comes in and has a different opinion.
Yeah, we're kind of accustomed to an erratic level of commitment and decision-making out of the White House, unfortunately. I think we have an historic opportunity right now, not only because the American people are so outraged and eager for real action, but also the NRA is kind of a mess right now. The NRA is in disarray. And I think that their ability to counter the will of the American people is somewhat diminished right now. So we have to take advantage of this opportunity.
There's still, it's easy to overstate the problems within the NRA, and they still have a lot of money. They're still very powerful.
Yeah, of course. But
do you worry about that, about their influence in politics? Do you think they still carry tremendous weight?
Well, the times are changing, but the stranglehold the NRA has had on gun legislation is a sign of a larger problem, which is that our politics have been overrun by lobbyists, been overrun by corporate money and other funders. So one of my flagship proposals is to give every American $100 every year that we can only give to candidates and campaigns, which would wash out lobbyist cash by a factor of 8 to 1.
So that would be you would give every American $100 every year to donate to a campaign.
Just democracy dollars. You use it or lose it. You can only use these dollars to contribute to a candidate or campaign, and if you don't use them, they disappear, and you get.
So would there still be lobbyist money allowed? I mean, you can't stop that, can you?
So that's the trick here, Anderson, is that the NRA has their tens of millions of dollars. They have legislators locked up. And so the legislators feel like it's in their self-preservation to listen to the NRA and not the will of the American people. Money talks in this country, and it's very hard to push lobbyist money out of politics entirely. So what we do is we wash it out with a flood of people-powered money, where if you're a legislator and the NRA says, hey, I've got $500,000 for you to run against you, and then your people say, look, who cares about their $500,000? I've got $5 million because there are 50,000 of us giving you $100 each. Then we can actually turn and align the legislators' self-interest with the will of the people.
What do you support in terms of change on laws regarding firearms?
I'm aligned with most all of the other Democratic candidates where we need universal background checks, we need red flag laws, we need to ban military-style assault weapons. Now, the question is, why are we not getting this done? And then the answer is the NRA and lobbyist cash and the fact that the legislative process is now disconnected with the will of the people. So we have to address that. Then we have to try and get the gun manufacturers' interest aligned also with the American people. We need to have a perpetual buyback of guns in this country because there are over 300 million firearms out there in private hands.
Even if there's an assault weapons ban, I mean, that's one of the conclusions that they reached in 2004. I think the final report on the assault weapons ban was that it wasn't long enough to actually have a demonstrable effect on gun deaths because there are so many
out there.
Weapons still out there.
Yeah, no matter what laws we have in the books, it doesn't diminish the supply that's out there because it's not like these guns disappear. I mean, a lot of them are in private homes. So a perpetual buyback where any gun owner could trade in their gun, even if it's beat up or crummy. I mean, you can imagine some of them being like, oh, this is not the gun. This is not my favorite gun. I'll trade this one in, and we can start to decrease the supply over time. We can also try and make the guns safer by having them be personalized to a particular owner's handprint. So it's not fingerprint. It doesn't need to actually read your fingers, but it can actually be personalized based upon your grip, the dimensions of your fingers, like where the weight's coming from. And so then if that gun gets into a child's hands or someone else's hands, then it's useless. And many gun owners are parents and would be very excited about personalizing their weapon, particularly if the government were to subsidize that or even pay for it.
Elon Musk tweeted out support for you.
Yes, Elon is part of the Yang Gang. We're so excited about it.
What was it? It was the 3-word tweet?
It was "I support Yang," which says it all.
That's all you need to say?
But now Elon's team is in touch with my team, and we're going to put our heads together. Elon's ahead of the curve, obviously, in terms of seeing the future
everything.
And seeing what's coming.
Yes.
And
so the guy's brilliant, clearly.
Yeah, so we couldn't be more thrilled with his endorsement.
Vice presidential candidate, perhaps?
I don't think he wants that job, Anderson. I think he'll be like, SpaceX, Tesla, VP. I have a feeling a VP might lose in that horse race.
Andrew Yang, it's good to talk to you. Thank you.
It's great seeing you. Thank you, Anderson.
Appreciate it. There's breaking news in the investigation of Jeffrey Epstein's apparent suicide. Tonight, the New York Times reports that one of the 2 guards who were supposed to be watching Epstein wasn't even a regular guard in the first place. That person was filling in and is not a full-fledged correctional officer. A source with knowledge of Epstein's time at the jail tells CNN that his cell was not regularly monitored the night he was believed to have killed himself, and the 2 guards monitoring the unit he was held in were both on overtime. Many of his accusers now wonder if they will ever get justice. Julie K. Brown is the Miami Herald investigative reporter with really breaking and leading the reporting on the Epstein story from the start and for years. First of all, when you heard, this news, this is something you've been working on for years. What went through your mind?
I was just stunned. Just like everybody else, the first thought was, isn't he on suicide watch? And how does someone commit suicide when they're on suicide watch? I thought the same thing as everybody else did.
Right.
And my first thought actually after that was to call the women, to call the victims. I called them immediately. And, they were very distraught.
Because they felt that they weren't going to get answers, and that anybody else who was involved might not be brought to justice?
I don't know if it was that as much as, they had been wanting, their whole goal was to hold him accountable, right. And to see that he finally go to prison,
right.
Because he got such a sweetheart deal back in 2008, and he mercilessly in a lot of respects, treated them terribly.
Yeah, I mean, he had detectives following them.
Oh, yeah.
Threatening them.
And his lawyers were submitting, their Facebook pages, or at the time it was MySpace, that's how long ago it was. But, because they were drinking, one of them was drinking a beer, or one of them was smoking marijuana, or they did all they could to dig into the deepest, darkest part of their lives. And remember, these were girls who came from vulnerable environments and broken families.
Right, and there's a reason he picked people in that situation.
Yeah.
Just in terms of possible co-conspirators, I mean, do all the answers die with him? Or, I mean, obviously he knew a lot of stuff that he could have revealed had he been alive, if he was so inclined or wanted to, lessen a deal. And so, are there other ways to get at justice for the victims?
Well, he had a lot of people helping him. He did not do this on his own. You don't marshal, hundreds of girls to molest 3 times a day, as we saw in the documents that were released the other day. He had to have it at least 3 times a day. And he wanted different girls all the time. It wasn't even enough to have a handful that came all the time. He wanted tons of them. And so in order to do that and to recruit these girls from various places, he had some women that helped him do this and kept his schedule and would call and go to these schools and go to other places where teenage girls congregate and try to lure them into giving him a massage. Right. That was the code word for what he was doing, and you'll get $200 and you'll give an old man a massage. And, these girls, didn't have any money. Some of them were pretty much homeless.
And just in terms of questions you have about his death, you had pointed out his cushy treatment when he was in jail. I think it was in Florida. He was able to basically get all this preferential treatment. You must be curious if there was some level of that going on in this facility.
I absolutely think there was some level of that. He was a master manipulator. And he, he had a jail term in Florida like no other sex offender would ever get in Florida. I mean, he was allowed to leave every day for 12 hours a day to go to a very nice office in Palm Beach. And he was greeting his visitors and even greeting women there. And he hired his own private security detail. I mean, it was unbelievable, the kind of privileges that he had when he was jailed in Florida for, a brief period of time. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that he somehow managed to convince, a commander or I don't know who in the jail to say, well, I don't want to have, and I've seen it in the documents for the jail term that he had in Florida where he didn't like to have lights on, for example, in his cell. So, so he would convince somebody not to let him turn the lights off, which is kind of a security issue because you don't see what the inmate's doing if you don't have that little nightlight on. So he managed to do that in Florida. I'm sure that he persuaded them to not have a cellmate. He probably didn't want a cellmate.
Yeah. Julie Brown, again, thank you for all your incredible work on this, and obviously it continues. Thank you. Appreciate it. The Trump administration today announced new, far tougher standards for legal immigrants to obtain green cards or to qualify for citizenship. Under the plan, green card applicants who have used government benefits such as Medicaid, food stamps, housing vouchers could be denied full-time status because they'd be considered more likely to need assistance in the future. In effect, the financial status of those seeking permanent status here would be heavily scrutinized. The rule, which covers 837 pages, won't go into effect for a couple of months, and legal challenges are likely. They would apply to those wanting to remain in the country and those seeking to enter. I want to get perspective now from Univision anchor Jorge Ramos. He's the author of Stranger, The Challenge of a Latino Immigrant in the Trump Era. I spoke with him before airtime. The news that the Trump administration is now making it harder for legal immigrants to stay here, that's a whole new level for this administration.
Donald Trump is the most anti-immigrant president in the last almost 70 years. So this is just another different step that he's taken. This is a president who separated babies from their mothers, who's putting children in cages, who's not allowing people who are applying for political asylum to stay here, and now he's attacking legal immigrants.
It's you look at the Statue of Liberty. It's give us your tired, your poor, huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The idea that only wealthy people coming from countries that this administration seems to want to attract can contribute to America is, it's just a ridiculous notion.
And Donald Trump is not very good at being sensitive, and he's not very good at math, because what they're telling us is not the whole truth. They're trying to give you the idea that immigrants are criminals or that they're too expensive, and that is not true. Of course, at the beginning, immigrants, we have to pay for education and for healthcare and for public services, but at the end, it's just a great business to have immigrants in this country. I was reading a study by the National Academy of Sciences, and at the end, all immigrants, both legal and undocumented, contribute more than $2 billion a year to the economy of this country. That's what we call the immigrant surplus. And the Trump administration is not telling you that.
It also it is a fundamental view of the United States, of what this administration clearly wants the United States to look like down the road. The idea that whites will not be the majority, it's an exciting transformation of the country. It's an exciting evolution and progress of our country in many different ways. Clearly, there's, among white supremacists, white nationalists, that is viewed as a horrific event.
I do understand, but there's nothing really they can do against this incredible demographic revolution. In 2044, everyone is going to be a minority. And then I think President Trump represents those who are trying to revert that trend. And he doesn't say it, but he would like, it seems to me, that's his vision, just to have America look like him again. And that's going to be impossible.
So for those who support what the administration is doing and say, well, look, America should have the best and the brightest, and if, that's, in their opinion, people who are not taking public assistance early on, what's wrong with that?
But they're here. The best and the brightest are already here. Immigrants, both legal and undocumented, they harvest the food that we eat. They build the apartments and the houses where we live. They take care of our children. The country is great thanks to its diversity and thanks to its past of immigration, and because we continue with that tradition.
I want to play something that the acting commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection said in reaction to the video of a young girl crying that obviously got a lot of attention after that ICE raid on close to 700 undocumented workers. Let's just play what he said.
Uh-huh.
So I understand that the girl's upset, and I get that. But her father committed a crime. And just so the American people know also, is that girl, her mother was home, and she was reunited with her mother within a few hours that night.
Her father committed a crime by crossing into the United States, apparently.
That's another 10 or 11 million. So officially, we are in the business, this government is in the business of separating children from their parents. We know that for sure. And when I hear things like that, I understand, are we talking about also all the Americans, millions of Americans who benefit from the work of undocumented immigrants? Undocumented immigrants, that father didn't come to this country to go to Disneyland. He didn't come to go just to see a movie. No, he came to work. And we all benefit from their work. And that's what we're not saying. Whenever we go to a restaurant or to a hotel, just do the experiment. Go to the back room, go to the kitchen, go to the lower floor, and you'll see the people who are really doing the job.
We know, you go to a Trump resort, you go to a Trump golf course, you will find that, at least in the past, up until it was exposed, you will find undocumented immigrants. The hypocrisy is really astounding. Even reports of, Polish workers who were undocumented doing demolition to do the foundation for Trump Tower, his, allegedly his crown jewel.
And also what's important is just to see the alternative. We've been discussing for 20 years now the possibility of legalizing 10, 11 million undocumented immigrants. There's nothing wrong with that idea, but he's just giving you the only option for them, which is just to deport someone who came here to work for the American people.
Jorge Ramos, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Up next, the latest on the arrest made following the shooting massacre in Dayton, Ohio, a new arrest. Plus, I'll speak with Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy on efforts to pass gun control legislation. President Trump has talked about, quote, meaningful background checks, unquote. The question is, what does that really mean? Is it all talk, no action? We'll be right back. Good evening. We start with news of an arrest made in the investigation of the massacre in Dayton, Ohio. Charges unsealed at a federal court in Ohio. 9 dead after that attack. Investigators still piecing together why the gunman did it and how. Our Gary Tuckman is in Dayton with the story. So, Gary, what's the latest?
Well, Anderson, the gunman who murdered 9 people here this past weekend here in Dayton, Ohio, is dead, but a friend of his is in a lot of trouble in jail tonight, facing federal firearms charges in connection with the murders. His name is Ethan Colley. He's 24 years old, and he was a buddy of the killer. He is accused of providing a 100-round magazine that was used in the killing. He's accused of providing body armor that was used in the killing. He's accused of setting up the AR-15 that was used in the killing. Now, his attorney is saying that Colley knew nothing about the murders that were about to happen. He was totally in the dark about that. And interestingly, prosecutors here, the U.S. Attorney's Office, say the same thing, that they have no evidence whatsoever that he knew what was going to happen. That being said, it's totally unclear why he provided these firearms to his friend. One thing we're being told, for him to purchase these firearms, he had to declare under oath that he was not a drug user. Prosecutors are saying that he, Colley, and the killer together used many drugs over a period of years, hard drugs like LSD, marijuana regularly, and that they used those drugs, so therefore he violated the oath when he bought these weapons for the killer. The U.S. Attorney's Office talked to us about the case today.
Agents executed the search warrant of Colley's apartment. They recovered the Draco pistol, a Taurus semi-automatic pistol, ammunition, drug paraphernalia, a clear glass pipe, and what is commonly referred to as a bong, as well as what appeared to be mushrooms. Colley was then taken into custody on Friday evening.
So this 24-year-old friend faces the possibility of found guilty of these charges against him, 15 years in prison. He has a detention hearing Wednesday to determine if he will get bail, and he will allow to be out, at least temporarily. Anderson.
And just briefly, Gary, there were reports that, the sister was killed in the attack of the shooter, and that a friend was also with them. Is that this person?
Yeah, it's not clear if it's the same friend. It's not clear. That's what's terrible about this case and puzzling about this case, that there's so much not known. I mean, the basic thing is, why would this friend provide all these items for this killer? But we don't know if this friend that's described, Anderson, is this guy. It's just not clear at this point. What I can tell you right now, here in Dayton, Anderson, this is still a nightmare to so many people, but with all the funerals and memorials taking place right now, everyone remembers it's very real.
Yeah, Gary, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut joins me now. He's made gun control a public priority of his since the Sandy Hook school massacre in his state in 2012. Senator Murphy, are you any more or less optimistic tonight that Congress will actually act on either new gun control measures or background checks? Because, as you know, all Senator Mitch McConnell has said is that he'd consider some form of red flag law, so-called, or background check, but no details.
Well, I wake up every day optimistic because I know eventually democracy catches up to senators who oppose 90% of their constituents who want things like universal background checks. But there does seem to be some interesting new momentum around this issue of extending background checks to make sure that it covers all gun sales. There has been discussions happening between Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, including the White House, discussions that continue this week. As you mentioned, it still all rests on the decision of one senator, Mitch McConnell, as to whether he wants to bring compromise legislation before the Senate. He may be unlikely to want to divide his caucus right down the middle and put a very controversial vote in front of his members. But there is a chance that we could get a deal that would extend background checks to the tens, hundreds of thousands of sales all across the country today, where criminals and people who are seriously mentally ill can get guns without having to go through one of these checks.
Is McConnell's strategy, in your opinion, an attempt to kind of slow walk this so that whatever gets debated doesn't get debated when the public is paying as much attention as they may be now, or emotions are as raw as they are now?
Well, we don't reconvene until after Labor Day. And of course, the worry is that you and many others won't be covering this subject as often as you are today. And Mitch McConnell will be asked to deal with whatever the crisis du jour of early September is, which is why we'd like to lock in an agreement on a piece of legislation that Republicans and Democrats can support. And we'd like to get the president, who has made a bunch of noise about supporting a background check checks deal. We'd like to get his imprimatur on a specific proposal, because if we lock that in now, it makes it much harder for Mitch McConnell to deny us a vote, especially given the fact that the House has already passed in a bipartisan way a universal background checks bill. So it is only the Senate that's standing in the way of that kind of progress.
It does seem with the president that he will pay lip service to the idea of, what he's now calling meaningful background checks. In the past, after Parkland, he talked about raising the age of anybody being able to buy a long gun, and also more on background checks. But it seems like often that's just something to affect the day's news cycle and get a headline that he's, wants meaningful background checks. And then he doesn't really follow through because he talks to the NRA or others.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I was at the meeting at the White House right after the Parkland shooting, in which the president seemed to endorse not only universal background checks, but bans on assault weapons. And then within 24 hours, the NRA had been in his office and he has changed his mind. I spoke to the president this weekend. I can't tell whether he is more sincere, but he certainly believes that there is a deal to be had on what he calls a meaningful background check bill. The devil's in the details as to what he means about that, but he is certainly, talking to a lot of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle about trying to get something done. And I intend to stay in touch with him and try to keep his feet to the fire, because I know in the end, Republicans aren't going to support background checks legislation unless the president supports it. The only way that we get enough Republicans to get to 60 votes in the Senate is if the president is pushing them to get there. I remain pessimistic that that's how this is going to play out, but I'm glad that he is still interested in this.
Senator John Barrasso, one of your Republican colleagues, is the number 3 person in Senate leadership. He said the other day that he doesn't think universal background checks have much of a chance, and is skeptical even of red flag laws, which are supposed to be kind of the easiest measure to pass. Do you think the NRA and others could leverage Republicans in the Senate to vote against even that?
Well, my Republican colleagues are really nervous because the NRA, just isn't as powerful as they used to be. They're having a crisis at their board level because they are hemorrhaging members. People just aren't signing up to be part of the NRA like they used to, in part because the NRA is so out of step with their own membership. 80% of NRA members want universal background checks, and yet the NRA is lobbying against the bill. So I think Republicans right now are in a tough spot because the NRA is not going to ride to the rescue of their members who vote against a background checks bill on the floor of the Senate.
Do you really think the NRA is in that much trouble? Because I've talked to some people who say, look, don't think just because they have internal issues and concerns over budgets and stuff that they're not a powerful organization that wields power.
Well, listen, the NRA's power has always been about perception. I'd make the argument to you that they are a paper tiger, that over the years they have lost a lot more elections that they have won, that the retrospective on the 1994 congressional midterms is not really about an assault weapons ban that beat Democrats. The assault weapons ban was really popular in 1994. It was about the health care law and an unpopular president. I don't think the NRA is as powerful as they make it out to be, but that perception of their power is really what's at issue right now. And a lot of Republicans that knew that they were taking a risk by voting against the majority of their constituents on gun issues now are just asking questions as to whether the NRA is going to have their back. And those are the kind of questions that ultimately may lead us to get over the finish line. Again, I think this is tough to do with a president who was back